Welcome to this new emission of Globedades. This is a podcast from the Faculty of Global Studies at Universidad Anáhuac, Mexico. My name is Arturo Flores, and today we are going to have a very interesting program. We are going to talk about contemporary Chinese issues with our very special guest, Ivo Ganchev. I'm going to read a very brief bio of our guest. Ivo did his PhD at Beijing University in comparative and political systems. Currently, he's assistant professor in international relations and director of corporate education at Beijing Foreign Studies University. And he's also the founder of the Center for Regional Integration and the editor of a recent book on Latin American regionalism, which you are going to tell us the title as well in a couple of seconds. So, Ivo Ganchev, welcome to Globedades. It's a pleasure having you here.
Many thanks. Muchas gracias. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at Anáhuac University and to talk to you and also to the brilliant students of this wonderful institution.
Thank you, Ivo. So to start the discussion, China, of course, has become a very interesting topic in the last couple of years, I would say, based on the presence and the leadership that China has had in recent times. And first of all, what made you look at going to China? Being a Bulgarian, how you ended up in China? Tell us. This is a very interesting story that I would like the people that see and listen to this podcast to know this story.
Sure. Well, my story, I guess, it's a little bit complex. I always had an international mindset when I was a kid. I went to international schools and moved around quite a bit. And then I had to basically choose what to study for my bachelor's degree. Early on, I was still 18 years old. I had a rock band at the time, so I had a very different mindset. And I was very interested in exploring new parts of the world. You know, in international relations theory these days, we speak about Eurocentrism as an abstract concept, but I think it has very practical and real implications when it comes to how people from Europe, the US, or the West more broadly think about the world. So I was always curious to explore new parts of the world, whether it's Asia, whether it's Latin America, which is a great pleasure for me to be visiting right now. And really, when you look at these other parts of the world, the non-Western parts of the world, China is by and large the most interesting emerging economy, or was at the time an emerging economy. Now it's a global power. So I decided to try and learn a little bit of Chinese as just a way to travel there, explore the country, and also use it as a gateway to other Asian countries. So when I was 18 years old, my first time in China was just signing up for a very short-term program to go there and teach English actually for a couple of months, and also use the rest of the time to just travel there. And when I came back, my Chinese had improved substantially because I went to a very small town called Yangzhou. Yangzhou is a historical city where Marco Polo visited and spent some time. And it's in Jiangsu province, which is the most economically developed province in China, which also was a gateway for me to see the magic of Chinese growth at the time. So after that experience, when I came back, I was just way ahead of my classmates in terms of learning Chinese. And that led me to many new opportunities. And I ended up getting a scholarship to go to Nanjing University for a few months, where I was determined to improve my Chinese. And I sort of tried to stay a little bit away from the international community so I could use the language more. And effectively, after about half a year there, I was lucky enough to pass the HSK level 6. HSK stands for 汉语水平考试. 汉语 means Chinese, 水平 means level, 考试 is exam, so Chinese exam. Basically, it's just like the TOEFL in English. So after I passed the highest level seal of the HSK that basically certified me as somebody that's fluent in Chinese. Now, how fluent I was is another question, because of course I'd spent very little time in the country, but I was, I guess, good enough to pass the exam. So that opened up another opportunity for me to visit Hainan University and do some research there very early on. I was still a bachelor's student. And effectively, that enabled me to interact with Chinese scholars at a very early age. I was researching the Chinese dream, which is a concept that at the time Xi Jinping proposed in about 2014, 2015. And then basically, after that, when I came back to the UK, that led me to an opportunity to become a teaching assistant at Newcastle University, because I had a lot of experience with Chinese scholars and students, and we had a lot of Chinese students coming into the university. So basically, because of my good academic performance and experience in China, the academics there invited me to lead some seminars on macroeconomics for the Chinese students, so I could help explain some concepts, to help them in terms of writing their thesis, their academic papers. And that opened up a whole new sort of opportunity for me, both in terms of developing a career in China and in terms of sort of an academic path that I went on later. So out of that whole experience, effectively, it enabled me to first go to the London School of Economics, where I got a master's degree in international relations research. And that was where I started to focus on Chinese foreign policy, which is something that keeps being an interest of mine until this day. And after that, I was trying to stay there for a PhD, and I managed to get an offer and a scholarship from London. But at the same time, being interested in China, fluent in Chinese, I applied to Peking University as well. And a little bit to my surprise, Peking University, which was rising in the global rankings at the time, an emerging institution, ended up making me a very, very good offer that, as some would say, I just couldn't refuse.
You couldn't refuse, yeah. Quoting the classics, yeah.
So that's how I ended up moving to China. Now, when I decided to move to China, another big shift happened. So that's sort of about 2016, 2017, when I decided to move there sort of in the longer term. And because the UK economy had started to stall, that was the time when the UK voted for Brexit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of social sort of dissatisfaction with the state of the economy was going on there. So basically, a lot of the UK investors were looking for opportunities in China. So I ended up establishing a very good relationship with a British investor and an Indian investor who were keen on setting up a business in China that's related to education consultancy. So I just graduated from the LSE. I had experience in China. I'd done all kinds of jobs related to China. I worked as a translator briefly before as well, translating a book from Chinese to English and all kinds of experiences like that. And that gave me an opportunity to start my first company in China, which was focused on coaching exceptional Chinese students to get into top universities and also to get top internships and work experience at the Big Four, at consultancies, investment banking, and so on, and enabled me to learn a lot as well from the experience, because I was acting as a bridge between East and West. And also it taught me how to be entrepreneurial, because I had to set up everything, you know, from registering the company, getting an office, hiring people, budgeting. You know, I spent very, very long hours at the office at the time, but it was a great experience interacting with clients, especially the parents of the Chinese. So your clients are, when you're in consultancy of students, the clients are often in Asia, at least, not the students, but the parents.
The parents, yeah, of course, yeah, with the interest to go to like improve the background of their children, right?
Yeah, it's really a big thing there. They're really determined to give them the best possible opportunity. So that's how I ended up in business and also doing a PhD. Now, because of this experience, I was also invited to start to lecture at Queen Mary University of London. And since my investor was British, the consultancy was focused on taking Chinese students that are exception to the UK. And since I was also doing a lot of things in China, academic research and managing the staff, I started spending 6 months in Beijing and 6 months in London. So from about 2016, 17 to 2020 to until the beginning of COVID, that was the setup. And I absolutely loved it. It was great because you acted as a bridge between East and West. Now, over time, obviously, you saw a lot of economic changes with COVID. Also, my ambitions changed slightly because after working with the students and trying to help them get into top companies, my mindset changed to, I wanted to start to consult the companies themselves. So basically, in terms of the business pathway, I decided that I was going to get into consultancy for Fortune 500s. And speaking Chinese, a great opportunity opened up for me to join a company called Top Brand Union. That's a boutique Chinese consultancy. We are the first Chinese consultancy that set up a global brand ranking for all of the brands that comes from China. There are other rankings, but they're not done in China. And I was the person that set it up. I set up their international department as well, which continues to function to this day, and a lot of other things that they did. And on the business side, I managed to sort of climb up the ladder and become a global partner, and also launch a podcast called The Branding Boardroom, which was done in English in terms of interviews with global experts on branding, but with subtitles in Chinese and aired nationally in China, which got me a lot of attention and a lot of invitations to join other conferences, forums, opportunities to consult companies, and so on. And then at the same time, I'd finished my PhD by then, and I was invited because of the podcast to Beijing Foreign Studies University to do some guest lectures there and to basically inspire some of the students to pursue business opportunities and understand international relations better, and these types of things. And then based on that opportunity, Beijing Foreign Studies University invited me there to join them as a full-time staff member. Now, at the same time, I'd started to do an MBA, which, in the University of London, which I completed as well. And so I got this dual track education and experience in both academia and business. Yeah. And at the same time, I was, publishing academic articles as well. So eventually, because I just wanted lifestyle change, I ended up leaving the company that I was working for, because I think, as a lot of your audience might know, working consultancy is very exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
So you just want to sort of slow down a little bit. And that's why I ended up moving to Beijing Foreign Studies University. And given my unique background linguistically in terms of business and academia, in addition to teaching international relations and sort of relevant subjects, I also became the director of corporate education, which is, I guess, a relatively important position in terms of the finances of the university, because corporate education generates revenue for university. And what we do there is we run a lot of programs for usually large Chinese banks and companies. For example, last semester we ran programs for ICBC, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, which is the largest bank in the world by total assets, larger than JP Morgan.
Yes.
Might come to a surprise.
Number one bank in the world. Absolutely.
As well as China Construction Bank, which is another bank which is nearly as big as ICBC. So that's what I ended up doing. And throughout the whole journey, I was able to use my Chinese and English and other language skills as well, since I've lived in other countries, to sort of act as a bridge between East and West. And that's what I continue to do, I guess, to this day.
Excellent. Well, very impressive, Ivo, what you've done so far. Congratulations for all your experience. To the people who are seeing, watching, and listening to this podcast, this is Globedades, a podcast from the Faculty of Global Studies at Universidad Anáhuac, Mexico. My name is Arturo Flores, and today we are talking to Ivo Ganchev. It's a pleasure to have you here, Ivo. With regards to the role of China in the world, what is your perception about this evolution? Because I think you have seen the last, let's say, 15 years, more or less, 10, 15 years, But I think now there is a great concern about, for example, the commercial disputes that are happening between China and the US. And this, I see it more like as a global battle for influence and to see who's going to be like the number one economy for the following 20, 25 years. So what is your perception of this, this like I wouldn't like to use the word battle, but it seems so.
For sure, yeah. There's a lot of competition, I guess, would be the milder way to put it.
Mhm.
Now, when you think of the rise of China in terms of economic power, in terms of global influence, I think you can really start to look at it around the year 2000, 2001 with China's entry to the WTO, when China started to align its regulations with sort of the global standards, when Chinese companies were pushed to go out. In Chinese, that's the 走出去 policy. 走 means walk, and then 出去 is out. So basically the going out policy. And then from about 2001 to 2008, you saw this sort of initial push for China engaging globally and also trying to learn a lot from the world. You saw at the time a lot of, whether it's Chinese business people, scholars, they would go abroad and try to learn as much as they can, bring it back to China. And that was a trend before as well, but it definitely accelerated in the noughties. And then in 2008, I think we saw a very big sort of shift, a pivotal point in the way that China sort of assumed the greater presence on the global stage.
Mhm.
And that came along with two events. The first event was the Beijing Olympics, and
Mhm.
China did extensive preparation for the Olympics, and this was the moment when China would show to the world what it could do.
Yeah.
And the Olympics were a great success in many ways, even in ways that people don't think about. For example, the way that you use the infrastructure after the Olympics,
Yeah,
which is often a
course.
big problem in a lot of cities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But in any case, that's the first big event that sort of gave a lot of confidence to both the Chinese government and people, I think. And then the second big event was the global financial crisis. So at the same time, you saw China coming onto the global stage and the West facing some problems. That was the first time that I can at least remember, that I know of, where when Western banks went to Chinese banks to ask for help in terms of sort of financing and helping to restructure their financial sustainability, which was a big moment for institutions like Chinese banks, because they'd never been asked to help their Western counterparts. Up until then, it was always sort of minority stakes that were held by Western banks like Goldman Sachs and the Chinese banks, and then they would help to sort of build up the banks and give advice and all of that. And this moment, this dual shift with the rise of China and the global economic crisis, was the beginning of sort of China's greater, or at least more visible, rise on the global stage. Now, from about 2008 until about 2013, they were riding sort of this wave, and they had a lot of momentum. But at the time, if you were studying Chinese foreign policy at the time, one of the debates in the field was if China is a free rider in the global economy, because China was growing. But the other question was, well, now what is China contributing to the global economy? So China was under a lot of pressure to do something on the global stage in terms of helping other countries or contributing to global governance. And at that point, you also saw the change in administrations in China with Xi Jinping coming into power in 2012, 2013. And when a Chinese leader comes into power, they normally want to introduce some new idea or initiative that will be a part of their legacy. And at that point, China introduced the Belt and Road Initiative, which I think is probably the one of the most discussed topics in terms of Chinese global engagements in the past decade. So moving forward with the launch of the BRI, China started to pursue very actively global engagement in terms of, for instance, building infrastructure. The Belt and Road was partially conceived because they believed there was a gap in infrastructure globally. And that actually turned out to be true. I don't think the Chinese policymakers expected the BRI to be as successful as it was, because there were so many countries that suddenly sort of started to gravitate toward this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this idea. especially across the global south.
Mhm.
So this moment was a very, very big shift. And then you saw Chinese banks that started to finance a lot of these big projects. China had a lot of construction capacity. The infrastructure in China had been more or less built, at least its basics or fundamentals by this point. So China had a lot of capacity to build infrastructure globally. And from about 2013 to 2017, you saw this sort of global push for China sort of helping the world or contributing to the world in some way. Now, in about 2017, with Xi's second term, you saw China starting to get a little bit more assertive on the global stage, especially when it comes to, for instance, disputes that they have in Asia with other countries, such as in the South China Sea. And effectively, at that time, the Western scholarly community came up with the term wolf warrior diplomacy, wolf warrior coming from the title of a Chinese film, in which the main character is in a way, a Chinese hero, or like kind of a superhero, I guess you could call him. In any case, so the wolf warrior diplomacy period, that's at least that's how it's referred to in the literature, although I think China wouldn't agree with this term very much, was when China started to see how far it can push its interests and assertiveness globally. Remember, that's a country which is only rising now on the global stage. In the past couple of hundred years, China was not necessarily a major geopolitical player, although it influenced a lot of events, for example, communist insurgency. So that's a first generation leadership of a global power. So they were trying to push it and sort of test the limits of how far their assertiveness can go globally. At least that's how I perceive it. And before that, in the Deng Xiaoping era, you had the opposite end of the spectrum. They were testing how much they can hide and bide and take their time and pursue economic growth. So in the Deng Xiaoping era and in the Xi Jinping era, you saw two sort of ends of the spectrum where they tried to lay low and where they tried to sort of rise on the global stage. And I think this shows you that they were testing how far this new policy of greater assertiveness can go. And of course, there were some, I guess you could call them successes in terms of China managing to establish its interests globally. And there was also some backlash, especially countries in Southeast Asia that got a little bit concerned about China's rise in influence.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you saw the U.S. getting more and more concerned with Obama's pivot to Asia, since the U.S. realized that China will be the main geopolitical competitor in the coming years. So effectively, I think by the middle of COVID-19, I think China had calibrated its foreign policy and presence on the global stage in terms of the way that it sort of conducts itself, in the way that it became a little milder in terms of expression and in terms of the extent to which they were pushing for assertive presence globally. But at the same time, they continued the trend of global expansion, for instance, with Chinese companies going abroad, which continued after COVID-19. And you saw the Chinese push for vaccines globally during the pandemic and so on. So I think that's where we are today with the more calibrated Chinese presence globally. And we have also the relationship with the U.S., which I would describe as in a state of, as Ian Bremmer says, managed decline. Now, that's to say that there are a lot of channels that are established between the two countries, which are still working. They're functional, they're diplomatic. There's a lot of people-to-people exchanges. If you go to the embassy of the U.S. in Beijing, you're going to see a tremendously long queue. The longest visa queue that I've seen at any embassy in Beijing. So there's still a lot of people going in both directions. But at the same time, at the government level, you see sort of this understanding that the structural competition that John Mearsheimer and other scholars have spoken about has to result in some kind of increased competition, because, of course, the established power is not happy about a rising power taking its place, or at least even surpassing it in terms of economic growth. So I think that's where we are. We're in a state of managed decline, where China is repositioning itself and reorienting itself towards other markets in the global south. And the U.S. is making efforts to contain China and shifting its attention from NATO and other regions in the world to the Indo-Pacific, as well as, I guess, Latin America.
Well, very, very interesting. Just a reminder, this is Globedades, a podcast from the Faculty of Global Studies at Universidad Anáhuac, Mexico. My name is Arturo Flores, and today we are talking with Dr. Ivo Ganchev about Chinese contemporary issues. And Ivo, I think one of the main characteristics of China is that there are many stereotypes about China. And well, myself, a couple of years back, I was doing some business in China. I traveled quite often. And I think still there is this perception of, I don't know, I'm not going to say any adjective, but there are many stereotypes about Chinese people, Chinese lifestyle, and in general, China as a country. But I believe it's a good experience to go and see it by yourself, right? So, for example, for the students that we have here at Anáhuac, I'm sure that many students are quite curious about going to China or having any type of exchange or possibility to visit the country. What do you recommend, or do you know any channels, any opportunities in terms of scholarships, universities, or places that that you could recommend to the people or the students of Anáhuac, particularly, that they could go and see?
Sure. Well, let me just start by making a brief sort of comment about the stereotypes. China is a very big country. It's a vast country. If you think of the whole population of, for example, the U.S. and with North and South America altogether, that's still smaller than China's population. So, some stereotypes might be reflective of certain generations or certain parts of China, but they definitely can't describe what's happening in the whole country as a whole. And also, some of the stereotypes are simply outdated. These might be things that used to be true, but they're not true because China has developed so fast. And definitely, if you go to any major Chinese city, whether it's Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, you'll find a lot of younger and middle-aged Chinese people who have a really global mindset, and they've traveled the world, and they've studied, they've worked abroad, they're fluent in English and sometimes other languages as well. So really, in China, you can find everything. You can find whatever really you're looking for. Now, when it comes to going to university in China, I think the first thing that the students have to think about is learning Chinese. So if you're going to China, there are some students that go there and do a program in English. That's one possible path. There are some students that go there to learn Chinese. That's another possible path. And there are some students who are really dedicated that either already speak Chinese or that are willing to first learn Chinese, spend time learning Chinese for a year or two, and then enroll into a program that's fully in Chinese. Now, obviously, this means that sort of the localization of your experience will vary tremendously. Let me go through these options very briefly in terms of what the students could pursue as opportunities. When it comes to programs in English, since I think the most common case at Anáhuac would be a student that's graduated with a bachelor's degree here looking for a master's degree in China. The probably top two programs in terms of what I regard as the most prestigious master's programs there would be the Yanqing Academy at Peking University, which is a 1 or 2 year, it depends on really how you structure it, because there's a lot of flexibility there, master's program that's fully funded. It's a little bit like the United Nations in the sense that they recruit outstanding students from
All over the world?
yeah, all over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're really interested in top students that are not necessarily just from, Ivy League universities or brand universities, but also that are really proactive. The recruitment method is a little bit sort of similar to that in the US, in the sense that you have to explain your motivation. There is an interview and so on. So you really have to be somebody that's driven and proactive and knows where you're going, and you have a good chance of getting in. The other one that's basically a similar program to Yanqing is Schwarzman Scholars, which is the Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University, which was started by Schwarzman, the billionaire, which is also a fully funded program. The recruitment for Schwarzman starts a little early. I think it's a couple of years early. So if you're trying to get in there, and you just graduated, that means you might have to work here for a year or two if you're applying now. And even if you get in, you'd have to wait until sort of the entry point comes. So these are programs in English, and they are very, very well run and fully funded. Now, there's other programs in English as well. So some universities have just master's programs that they run in English. I think if you're going to China to get the best education experience, you should be aiming at the top universities. So if it's not speaking in Tsinghua, which also have other programs as well, they have MBAs and so on. But if they're not speaking in Tsinghua, you can look at Fudan University in Shanghai. You could look at East China Normal University in Shanghai. You can look at Renmin University in Beijing, which is very well regarded. There are also universities that are not in Beijing and Shanghai, for example, Zhejiang University, which is very good as well. But not a lot of students necessarily gravitate to it if they're international, because it's obviously not located in one of the major cities. So these are sort of potential pathways that they could explore if they're doing an English-speaking program. Or one final comment, if you want to do a program in China, but you want to get a Western diploma for whatever reason, there are people that have this sort of
dual.
Yeah.
You can do it like.
Yeah, they might have a dual diploma sometimes, or it's usually a dual diploma. I think sometimes they do also offer a program that's sort of only awarded by the Western University, but in any case, there are joint venture universities, such as NYU in Shanghai, such as the Nottingham Ningbo University. Personally, I mean, it depends on what's your motivation. I think if you want to go to the West, of course, you're better off going to the West. If you want to go to China, you're better off going to Peking or Tsinghua or a top Chinese program. But there are people that, for some reason, want the two diplomas or want, to keep their options open. So that's another possibility there.
And
now,
you can study in English as well, right?
Oh yeah, the programs are run in English. I mean, that's the main attraction point, because there's a lot of Chinese students that enroll in these programs. So that's really the reason why they enroll.
Yeah, that's an important fact to say, because maybe students say, well, I cannot learn Chinese, or.
So you can do the programs in English. Some students also expect that they will be able to learn Chinese on the side. I think the realistic outcome of this is that you learn some Chinese, but you don't really become fluent, because your main concern is your assignments and everything else that you do in English.
Your degree, to obtain your degree, basically.
Yeah. So that's sort of the first path if you want to pursue a program in English. Now, the second path is if you want to go there to study Chinese. Just as a language program, basically. Of course, there are short-term summer schools and all of that, but I want to spend a little bit of time on the university-run programs. So effectively, all universities, or almost all universities, run programs of teaching sort of Chinese to foreigners. In my view, and I guess that could be discussed, but I think the best universities to go and do that are the ones that focus on foreign languages, cultures, or studies. So in Beijing, that would be my university, Beijing Foreign Studies University, or Beijing Language and Culture University. There's also Beijing International Studies University. These universities just have more experience and a larger sort of support network for students that are specifically interested in the language. And also they have a lot of international students, because most students that go to China either start or are there for learning the language. So there are there are programs that run for one semester, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years. I mean, it's rare that anybody stays for longer than this. The way that the system works, or at least used to work, unless they've changed it since I remember it. Is that basically there's like different levels. So let's say at Nanjing University, it would be before split into 6 levels. So you can study basically for up to 3 years, because one level is completed in one semester. And you have the basic language modules that you take, and then you have some electives, which are usually related to either something to do with Chinese culture, Chinese society. You could also be learning classical Chinese, as I did for a semester, which turned out to be more difficult than I assumed. So basically, you can stay there for as short or as long as you'd like, between, I guess, 1 to 3 years. Nobody stays for more than 3 years, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you know some Chinese beforehand, of course, you don't start at level 0 or level 1. You just enroll into a higher level. And I think it's best if you go there with some Chinese. so that you just don't begin at ground zero,
Okay.
and you save yourself some time. And today it's quite easy to get to a good foundation, whether through a local sort of a Chinese course that might be run here in Mexico, or through online tutoring. There are a lot of platforms. I don't want to advertise any specific platforms, but there are many platforms where you can find an online tutor, and it's for a very low fee usually, because there are students that enroll on these platforms as tutors. And if you need speaking practice or anything like that, you can do it before you go to China. Of course, these language programs that I mentioned are also ran by the top universities. Some students really want to get a top brand university name on their CV. So even though they're studying the language, they go to Peking or Tsinghua, and then they put it on their CV. In terms of the experience, I don't think it differs so much because it's a language program, but it might make a difference to your employer in the future, perhaps. Depends on what you're concerned about. And these programs, there's still quite a lot of funding for them. So there are scholarships that they give out to students, usually through the Confucius Institutes. So I'm not sure what's the situation with Confucius Institutes here in Mexico City.
I think UNAM has got one, Confucius Institute, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sure that the students here, even if they're at Anáhuac, they can go to UNAM.
Yeah, they can go and
they can enroll in programs and apply and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not limited.
So I would advise them to go and ask there and see what are the scholarship options. Usually, they can get enough funding to sort of cover their living expenses, tuition fees, and so on. And then there are also other localized scholarships. So, for example, this is a Chinese government scholarship that's offered by the Confucius Institute. There are also city-based scholarships. So I know that Beijing, for instance, sponsors some students that study languages there. But I think it's easier to figure them out once you go there. So it's easier to get the Chinese government scholarship first, because there's a lot more students that are able to get it from abroad. It's much easier to get it, much clearer how to get it when you talk to the Confucius Institute. And then after you go there, if your scholarship expires after a year and you want to stay there and you need more funding, then you can explore the local scholarship options as a way to continue your language studies there. So that's option 2. You go to China in order to study Chinese. Now, option 3 is the most immersive experience, where you go there, and usually most students start by doing a language program there and then enroll onto a degree program. For me, it was a little different, because it happened so that I speak Chinese before I go there, which was very unusual. But if you apply for a program that's fully in Chinese, but you don't speak Chinese, and you have a scholarship for it, which is also the same type of scholarship, Chinese government scholarship, usually they will allow you for, I believe, up to 2 years to go and study the language first, and it's still funded. And then you do your, for example, 4-year program if it's a bachelor's degree, or 2 or 3-year program if it's a master's degree, and so on. The upside of this is that you really get a lot of time to explore China. The downside of this as a student is you really need a lot of time to do it. I don't know how much time the students here have or want to dedicate to this, so it's really worth thinking about. But once you get into a program that's basically fully in Chinese, you just end up being in the same situation as all the other Chinese students or international students who happen to speak Chinese. And that's sort of the basics of your experience. Now, I've never done a master's program in China, but I know a lot of people that have. So the master's programs usually run for 2 years. It's usually sort of in the first year that you end up taking a lot of your modules. And in the second year, it might get a little bit more relaxed, although it does depend on the school and the program. If you go for a PhD program, which I think is quite a challenge, especially if you haven't learned a lot of Chinese before. In the first year, you would take all of your modules, and then the second year, you'd have an exam which basically qualifies you for, I guess, formal PhD status. And then after that, it's up to you to finish your thesis and do your defense. And it depends on how quickly or slowly you can do it. I believe the funding runs for up to 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. But it does expire at some point, and you can extend for even longer if you'd like to.
it's really different because it's a PhD program. So some people are working at embassies or doing something else while they're there. So some people do extend for a long time, and they're not even funded because, if you work at an embassy, you basically can afford the fees and so on. And then there are others that are there only for the degree. So if you're a young student that just got your master's and you're rushing to get your PhD and then get into your career of choice, then you obviously want to do it much faster. So it's kind of flexible in terms of when you can do your defense. Of course, depending on department regulations. And then in terms of the quality of supervision and academics there and teaching, I think it's really what you make of it. At every department, you're going to find all kinds of people, just like at any university. At the top universities, a lot of the professors have experience abroad and have PhDs from the States, because that generation of Chinese scholars was sent abroad, usually with Chinese government funding, to go and learn the advanced, quote unquote, ways of doing research in the West, and then come back and share this with the Chinese students. Then as you move sort of further down the rankings, you can get, of course, much more sort of localized sort of education backgrounds for the professors. And then you also have people with practical experience very often in these departments. So at Beijing University, there are a lot of professors that worked in some government capacity at the central bank in China, at the United Nations, and now they teach from a more practical perspective. And you also get younger academics these days that just did their PhD in China, because Chinese education has improved tremendously in quality. So now they do recruit people from their own universities as well. And it's up to you how much you want to engage with the academic community. So for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was involved in both business and academia. And I didn't spend that much time engaging with the local academic community as much as I probably would have liked to, just because I had other urgent things to do. There are some students that really go to all the local conferences, and especially if you speak in Chinese and if you're a foreign scholar, you can get a lot of opportunities that way academically. And it's really what you make of it. And then if you're looking to go and teach in China after that with your PhD, I guess that's a whole other topic, but there are a lot of opportunities in that area as well.
Well, Dr. Ivo Ganchev, it has been a pleasure having you today at Globedades, our podcast from the Faculty of Global Studies at Universidad Anáhuac, Mexico. My name is Arturo Flores, and we hope that you're able to see this podcast, listen to it. And before I forget, the name of your book, the title of your book, Lessons from Regional Responses to Security, Health, and Environmental Challenges in Latin America, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, I hope it's not the last time that we have you here. It was a pleasure to have you today. And to everyone that listened to the podcast, thank you very much.
Likewise, and many thanks for inviting me, and I hope to be back on the show very soon.
Thank you. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.